guys, and welcome to another edition of the Roy's Boys podcast, brought to you by Carolina Electrical Services. For all your electrical needs, please call Jacob Marlowe at 704-320-7357. He'll take care of you in that regard. Josh and Anthony are here with you as always, and we got a shorter show, but still going to be a fun show. We got a good topic we're going to go ahead and get to, which is in the opening tip, which is brought to you by Rodan & Fields Executive Consultant Joy Marlowe for all your skincare needs. Call her at 803-804-0200. And, buddy, I put this up on Twitter the other night because I mentioned it to you during the Duke game about where Cam Johnson stands as one of the best shooters we've had under Roy Williams specifically. I think he's the best just in terms of you look at his numbers, how efficient he's been this year, shooting well above 40% from three. He's arguably one of the greatest shooters, at least in program history, and, of course, under Roy Williams.
I mean, I think one of the best is a definite. We talked about it just watching him the other night. I mean, he's a guy that when he's in a rhythm, I mean, it's hard to get him out of it. And, it's just nuts how deep he can get and shoot it with confidence, and it just goes in, no issue. He really likes a couple of spots on the floor, and I think he's a guy that seems like he fits what today's pro game is, which I think will definitely help him. Best in Carolina history under Roy Williams, there are a lot of good ones that have to be mentioned. I mean, of course, the one I think that everybody's going to want mentioned is Wayne Ellington. And, I mean, you look back on, just what he did in his time at Carolina, I think, it's definitely legitimate. I mean, the thing about him was, I mean, he was so effective from three, but, his great shooting ability inside the arc. He finished his career shooting 51.3% from two and 39.7% from three. I think there's definitely an argument to be had there. And, I mean, right now, this year that Cam Johnson has going on is just simply nuts. And really, I think blows just about any other year under Roy Williams for any guard or even forward, under him. So I don't know. It's a tough one because I think, you got Wayne Ellington, like I mentioned. Wes Miller, I think, will be a guy that'll get some mentions. I think those are probably the top two. I know Reggie Bullock was another one that you said was mentioned, and then that was interesting. I think that's probably another legitimate one. But, I think it's a good debate to have, and I think it's going to extend as we go further along. But, I think part of it is, the fact that people are not going to be willing to admit that he's probably the best shooter. Part of that will probably surround the fact that he wasn't there at the beginning of his career. So, I don't know. I think there's definitely an argument, but I would probably lean Wayne Ellington.
Do you think if this team were to make a Final Four or quit down the Nets in April, and he's a big part of that could sway the decision? Because a lot of the guys that were mentioned that I got a lot of feedback from Twitter, Wayne Ellington won a national championship. Wes Miller didn't play in the Final Four, but was a big part of that Elite Eight team coming off the bench. Justin Jackson, you got mentioned, won a national championship. Do you think that would play a part in where he would rank as his postseason success?
Yeah, I mean, of course, postseason success is how a lot of people measure, up guys when they try to compare one to another. So I think that's definitely something where that people would start to factor in with him, especially if he is as effective as we've seen him at times this year for this team. And I think the other thing that, people will always probably look back on and what might eventually give Cam Johnson the edge is that more than likely, I think he'll probably end up leading the team in scoring. I mean, it's pretty close between him and Kobe, but I would say, just because of his consistency, I think he might end up leading the team in scoring at the end of the season. Wayne Ellington didn't lead the team in scoring scoring. And part of that was, frankly, because Tyler Hansbrough was just as dominant as he was. But the other part of it was I think there was also more talent around him as well. I mean, when you look with Ty Lawson, Danny Green, once he got into the starting lineup, I thought was extremely effective as well. And even, during that 2009 championship run, I mean, Deion Thompson was really great as well. Of course, the next year, he became the number one scorer on the team, was pretty much forced into that role. And, of course, we all know how that went. But I don't know. I think that will definitely factor in, and I'd like to see how the argument changes from the fan perspective. But I mean, you mentioned Wes Miller, and Wes actually was on the team back in 2005 when they went to the national championship game. I'm not sure if he played or didn't play, but I know, I mean, when you look at Wes Miller, I mean, you look at the 05-06 season, shot 44% from three. But again, I mean, inside, the 2-point arc, he really just wasn't as effective. He was pretty much the definition of a 3-point specialist. I mean, that was what he was there to do. I mean, it was very rare that he was stepping inside the arc to take shots. So, I don't know. Maybe that's a guy that rings, true with Carolina fans, especially a lot of the older Carolina fans. They typically like to go with the guys that are older. So, but I mean, under Roy Williams, I think the argument's there, and who knows? Maybe we'll have to revisit this at some point later on in the season and see just where everybody sits, especially if they make a deep tournament run.
Yeah, there's something that we'll definitely keep our eyes on. I just thought coming off the Duke game, and he scored 26 points and didn't make a three, but he was making a bunch of tough twos and stuff like that. I was like, oh, this is a fun little discussion to have, and I was glad we actually got some feedback from our from the Twitter followers that even made it more interesting. So, just like you said, if this team goes deep in March and he's a big part of it, we'll rediscuss it. So we'll go ahead and move on into the main portion of today's podcast, which is the preview for tomorrow's, or now later on today's, Florida State matchup. And there's no rest for the weary. Carolina, coming up the big win against Duke, returns home to play Florida State. And all Florida State has done is won 8 in a row and thrust themselves into the discussion of getting a top 4 seed, which would translate to a double bye in the ACC tournament. They're getting it done defensively. They only allow 67.5 points per game. We were looking at it before we got on here because we haven't seen a whole lot of Florida State, so it was okay. Have they won any significant games in this win streak? And they have. They've won at Syracuse rather handedly, and they've beaten Louisville at home, which are 2 very good wins. And they just most recently went on the road to Clemson and got another road win. So they're doing it at home and on the road, and this is just a team that they know who they are as good as anybody else does in the country. They want to put the game in the half court. They've got excessive length, which makes them hard to score on. And they're a solid team. They're coming off an Elite Eight appearance last year, so they have experience winning big-time games. So another big test for Carolina after the Duke win.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at this team, we've always known Florida State to be one of the longer teams in the ACC, and as you said, they're they're long once again. The one thing that I really think that they lack that they've had in the past is that real, I'm not going to say dominant guard, but they've really had a guard that has been able to score, around the 14 to 16 points per game, in that area. And we just haven't seen that this year. Now, Terrence Mann, I know, one of only 2 guys on the team that is in double figures overall so far this season, averaging 11.7 points a game. But, I wonder if the size will be enough to bother the Carolina inside. And the other thing is, I mean, of course, we've seen it at times this year, even if it does, we've been able to heat up from outside at times. And, of course, who knows, maybe because they did struggle the other night against Duke, maybe they end up coming out and shooting well from 3. I mean, that's usually how these things work. So it would not shock me at all if they came out and shot very well against Florida State tomorrow or later today, as you said. We actually are pretty late here. But, I think you mentioned it, Florida State's going to want to play in the half court. They're not a team that's going to go up tempo at all. And, I mean, that's pretty much what Leonard Hamilton does. I mean, he's going to want to take the life out of you. He's going to want you to have to play his game. And as you mentioned, the guys they've got inside, I mean, you look at the numbers this year, and, I mean, Chris Kamaje, of course, with 1.6 blocks per game. You got, Mafundu Kabengele. I know that's his last name. The first name, not 100% sure on, but Kabengele with 1.2 blocks per game. And the other thing that I noticed about them is they average 7.7 steals per game. And again, we saw it against Wake Forest, and we said, look, that might not be that much of a concern because we had what seemed like an insurmountable lead and ultimately was. But again, against Duke, now I know we got out by, we were up at one point by 20. I understand that. But at the same time, when you look at it, you can't keep turning the ball over 17, 15 times a game. That's not going to really lead to, a ton of success, especially if you get into the tournament against a team that really shoots a lot better than Duke does. I mean, if you got a team that's shooting well from outside, all of a sudden you're going to be in a little bit of trouble. So, again, this is a team that really, outside of, just looking at Terrence Mann is shooting 46% from three. That's pretty good. But outside of that, there really aren't a lot of guys. Now, the one thing that I will give them also, they are very deep, which is something that Carolina really hasn't faced. I mean, this team can go. Just looking, I mean, they've got 10 guys that are average double-figure minutes, and then you got one guy in Devin Vasil who averages 8.8, so he still plays a decent amount as well. So they can go about 11 deep. Carolina right now has shortened the bench, and we heard this from both R.L. Bynum, who we had on here, and even Jones Angel. Carolina's had to shorten the bench because of the injuries. Now they're going with just 8. There's actually a team that is going to have a little bit more of an advantage depth-wise. I wonder if that'll pay off for Florida State. And, this is one of those games that, I'm kind of wondering, and this is what I guess, I'll want you to start off with. Is this one of those games that kind of feels like maybe, I mean, we talk about trap games usually in between big games. Florida State is a team that, I don't think should be overlooked. I don't think Syracuse behind them should be overlooked either. Florida State actually comes in ranked ahead of them, but because it's a game after the Duke game, does it have that sort of letdown effect maybe?
I think there's always that kind of potential, whether we win the Duke game or you lose the Duke game, just because there's so much emotion that gets invested into that kind of game. I think the good thing was we got almost 3 days off in between games, whereas last year we played Duke on a Thursday and turned around and played 36 hours later. We've got some time in between the game to celebrate the Duke win, digest it, and move on. I told my dad this today when I was talking to him, and I think this really applies. Virginia's schedule as we're talking with them and Duke for first place is fairly manageable the rest of the way. If they play the way that they're capable of, chances are they won't lose another conference game.
Right.
Carolina's got to treat every of these last 5 games as if when they walk on the floor, that's the ACC regular season title. Just because of the way the schedule stacks up with us and Duke as opposed to Virginia. So if we bring that kind of mindset, okay, hey, we lose today, we cost ourselves a chance to win the ACC. That's why I don't think there's going to be a potential for a letdown. I think, Florida State comes in with a national ranking. They've won 8 in a row, so they're not going to catch Roy Williams and the staff off guard. I mean, we played them 2 years ago. They won the national championship. They came in and I think they were ranked higher than us. So they've had potential. They always play us tough, but I think this team has matured during the conference play. I don't think they overlooked anybody after the Louisville game. I thought that was a wake-up call. I know we lost to Virginia, but that was a product that we just didn't execute well, and the players got hurt in the last couple minutes as opposed to just overlooking a good opponent. So I think we'll be ready to go. It's not a noon game, which I think also helps. It's a 3:45 tip for some ungodly reason. But that should allow time for the fans to get in there and be lively from the go. And, we've never lost a game after the first Duke game. I think it's one of those records that you look at Roy Williams and it's like, wow, that's pretty astonishing. We think about some of the losses we've had the first time we played Duke. The year that we had the buzzer beater at Austin Rivers, that we still came back the next time and won, or all the the years that Joel Berry's final shot got blocked, we came back the next game and won. Right. So I don't know. I'm kind of thinking that the Duke win was something that's going to jumpstart this team as we are, looking primed to make a run at this ACC championship and then in March, and that's why I think they'll win on Saturday. I think you're going to have another good performance from Luke May. But I think the guy that's really going to carry this team is Kobe White's always seemed to bounce back after bad games. And he wasn't nearly as good as he needed to be Wednesday night, even though we still won. He has to be better, and I expect him to bounce back. But, you mentioned it. Our bench is limited. We need a little bit more production from Nazir and Brandon and get what we got Wednesday night from Sevens more often until we get more healthy.
Yeah, I think Carolina wins the game too. I think it's going to be really a pretty close game. I mean, you mentioned it. This team comes in on an 8-game win streak, so I don't know if they put a little bit of pressure on themselves. But I also think that when you have a win streak of that significance, yeah, there is a little bit of pressure, but there's also a little bit of confidence. So I think Florida State comes in, they play well. Leonard Hamilton, I think, is just a fantastic coach. He's done something that, really isn't that easy, which is turn them into a team that is year in and year out, always one of those teams heading into the tournament that a lot of people think has a real chance. And I mean, he's even won an ACC tournament title. And we're talking about this coming at Florida State, which is a diehard football school. So, I think they end up having a good game. I think they do. They will be able to score inside just because of the size. And that's where I think, I think Luke May might have a decent game, but I wonder, we've seen it before. Size does bother him. So I'm not sure. And again, if he does have a little bit of an off game, or an off game for Luke May is according to this fan base 10-12. So if he does have an off game, I think we'll be okay, because I do think Cam Johnson will play great once again. I really feel like he's going to come out and have another great performance. And I feel like, you talked about one freshman that's going to bounce back. I really feel like Nazir Little is going to bounce back, because once again, after the other night against Duke, I think a lot of people were starting to say, well, Nazir Little didn't show up. This was the game against Duke. Is this guy really ready for the NBA? I still feel like he's probably a one and done, and I think he really wants to prove that to the people that are saying, maybe he's not this one and done guy. Maybe he has to come back. I mean, believe me, I think that, and this is something that we could talk about going forward. I think he would definitely benefit from, coming back next year and having another year to prepare. And also, I think just grow as a basketball player and as a young man. But if he does go to the NBA, I wouldn't be mad at him. I could definitely understand it. And so I think he comes out and has a big performance and plays well. And I think Carolina wins it. I'll say somewhere between 3 and 5 points. I think it'll be another nail biter. But, I think ultimately Carolina ends that win streak for Florida State.
All right, yeah, I'm with you. I think it's going to be a close game. And a lot of times these big time games are, and hopefully we come out on the right side of that. There is no buzzer beater segment tonight, just for the sheer fact that this is a shorter podcast and a quick turnaround from the Wednesday to Saturday. We will have that segment next week when we get to the Syracuse game. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap this thing up. I want to encourage you guys to check out the blog. I got the Duke recap up. I'll have the Florida State preview out first thing in the morning. Check out Anthony's blog covering Carolina football, the Heel Tough blog, as they have Junior Day tomorrow. I know you'll have some great stuff coming out about that, as we have some big-time recruits on campus. Are they going to be in attendance for the game tomorrow? Have you seen anything about that?
Yes, they will. I believe so. Now, there is a massive group. Apparently, the rumor is that it's around like 60. So from what I've heard, they're going to be there. And there should also actually be a group of former players that will also be in attendance as well. Now, the former players I know will be in attendance for sure. I'm just not sure on the recruits just because of the sheer number, but the early belief is that they will be in attendance. So yeah, you mentioned it. You got the big weekend on the court for the Tar Heel basketball team, and I mean, campus is just going to be buzzing tomorrow. They got a lacrosse game going on as well as a baseball game, but also, as you mentioned, junior day for the football team. So a lot of stuff going on, but definitely I think everybody's going to be focused on what's going on in the Smith Center at 3:45.
Yeah, that's right. So y'all make sure to check out Anthony's blog. He'll have some great stuff about these players' experience coming up, if anything big comes out of that. I want to encourage you guys to subscribe to this podcast through Spreaker, iTunes, Spotify, and now iHeartRadio. I want to thank you guys for listening. Go Tar Heels.